incident was about to take place that would shake the foundations of the civilized world.
It is time to open your mind. Time to discover your divine self as we navigate this holographic matrix together. Strap in, Cosmic Family, as we slide through this wormhole of cosmic information together in search of the truth.
You can't handle the truth.
It's time to go inside the matrix. With your host, Jimmy Brent.
All right, welcome everybody to Inside the Matrix. We're so happy that you were able to join us today, whether it's live or through the archive. We're always happy to have you here, and always we like to thank those of you who have been helping sponsor this show and keeping us on the air. We really appreciate all of you as well. So today, my guest is Jeffrey Prather. He's a retired Army officer, ex-DEA special agent, former DIA intelligence officer turned whistleblower, and then targeted by the government. In addition to hosting his own call-in weekly talk radio show, The Prather Point, he is also a martial arts master and teacher, Apache wisdom teacher, kinetic quotient creator and trainer, firearms and horsemanship instructor, published author, SAG film actor, speaker, father, husband, and chaplain. Jeffrey, that is quite a resume. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
You're an amazing guy. I've been following you now for a few months on YouTube on your show. And I really appreciate all the great information that you're bringing forward, the intelligence information, your ability to sift through the propaganda and the BS that we're all being exposed to, and ultimately negotiate that and figure out where the heck we are in the scheme of things. And so if you would, though, since you're new to this show, would you kind of go through your background a bit and give us a feel for, where you were born, how you were raised, your family life a little bit, and up until, recently. And you can share as much or as little as you like.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, I am actually a product of rape and then adopted out of St. Joseph's Orphanage by a wonderful family, and very blessed by that. And I started in martial arts at age 10 and was also introduced to Native American culture by my adopted parents shortly after that. Eventually, my wife found my birth mom, and she was actually born in Comanche, Oklahoma Indian Territory, exactly where the Apache, Kiowa, and Comanche were moved to. But then I went through, got a couple bachelors from the University of Arizona. Then I got my master's from Ohio State. And at the same time, I was commissioned ROTC there. I became an Army military intelligence officer, and I'd already been airborne, so I went to SOCOM, started in psychological operations with an airborne operational detachment, which attached me to 7th Special Forces and the Ranger Regiment. And back then in the 80s, it was all in Central America, which brought me into contact with the Contras and all of that. And so I kind of got my introduction to covert operations with the military aspect of the Contra, not the illegal aspect that Oliver North was doing, but the illegal. And covert means that you don't know the source of it. Clandestine is just you're hiding it. Covert is you don't know who's doing it, or you try and let somebody else do it. A lot of people don't know that. And then I was... that's how I went over from psychological operations to special forces. And then I was recruited into the, right before the Panama invasion, I was recruited into the Drug Enforcement Administration. They were running a special operations project, Snowcap, where it was kind of like clear and present danger, except it was overt, where you'd go with host nation, military and police in Central and South America to interdict coke labs. And I did that. And became a DEA special agent and primary firearms instructor because I got to go to some very elite special forces shooting schools, so they really taught me very advanced shooting. And then because of my background as a special agent and in special operations and intelligence, I was recruited into nominated into a group called Foreign Operations Group, which became later Foreign Intelligence Activity, which then kind of split, and then I ended up in the Defense Intelligence Agency's clandestine human services. Eventually became a boss there. When I was in 2003, I was activated, and I had been working to extradite the first Sinaloan cartel leader, Miguel Caro Quintero, brother of Rafael, who tortured and murdered our agent, Kiki Camarena, former Marine, very famous.
Oh, wow, yeah.
I'm sure you've heard of it. There's movies and books. And so as I started to do this, I had an informant, very high-level informant that I paid hundreds of thousands of dollars. But when I got activated, he was left in the wind. And he's out there now. He's written stuff, but I still won't out him. But I got called over to the Pentagon, or I have an office at Clarendon. I had an office at Pentagon, people both. And right across from the Pentagon is DEA headquarters and U.S. Marshals headquarters. And they asked me to come over because they said, hey, your informant is suing the administrator, which at the time was Michelle Leonhardt, and before that was Karen Tandy, and both of which I had worked with when they were Department of Justice attorneys. So you kind of got to think of Sessions and Barr and Janet Napolitano, that kind of thing, who I knew them. My informant was suing Tandy or Leonhardt, and I showed him the paperwork and said, hey, nah, I can't sue this. He wants the $5 million State Department reward. That's not part of the deal. Here's the paperwork. But I said, Leonhardt has destroyed my case about the extradition. And I left and I went back to work, and then I came off active duty, and because I was an Army Reserve major chopped to the Defense Intelligence Agency, and my regular day job was Drug Enforcement Administration Special Agent, Firearms Instructor. So then all of a sudden I started getting investigated by OPR, Office of Professional Responsibility. And it took me years to figure this out, but they just started hounding me. They coached witnesses. They perjured documents. Think Kleinsmith. They did all this stuff, and I had also been the liaison agent to ATF. And a lot of people don't know this, but actually Fast and Furious started at DEA. And so 1 year from retirement, with never having a bad evaluation, without outstanding evaluations in both Tucson and New York, I was fired. What
was the reasoning on all that?
Well, the first reason was I had outside employment, which I was I had permission for. The next was that I was a cult leader. They were trying to make me out like a Waco guy about my chaplaincy that I founded. And they just kept making stuff up. None of it ever stuck. But this is what they do.
You're right.
To kill the message, they try and kill the messenger. And so eventually I figured it all out. And eventually, in the Niebla Zambada trial, DEA agents raised their hand under oath and said, yes, we did have a deal with the Sinaloan cartel that in exchange for the guns going south, which killed Brian Terry, and I was involved in that a lot, the guns were going to the Sinaloan cartel, and in exchange, we let the Sinaloan cartel run drugs north. And that, you can look that up. That's Niebla Zambada trial. It's testimony, federal testimony by DEA agents. I'm not making this up. So the ATF was running guns south. The DEA was letting the Sinaloa cartel run drugs north. The FBI was running the hit team that killed Terry, and also Jaime Zapata was an ICE agent in Mexico. And then hundreds of Mexicans were killed by those guns, and those guns are still killing people. And I started doing, speeches and guest appearances. I had my own radio show until they canceled that. Then I had a YouTube cast with hundreds of thousands until they're just shutting me down now. But I'm trying to tell people what the deep state is doing because I lived it and I know how it works. I spent my whole career in the military, mostly special operations and intelligence, and in federal law enforcement. And so the deep state dark economy is guns, drugs, and people and human beings.
Right.
And so, for example, with my first introduction to covert operations, I saw what we were trying to do with the Contras because I was down there, which was a good thing. But then when it became illegal, Reagan, gave North the wink and a nod, and he ran a covert op. And then it was illegal. And then the CIA was running cocaine, Contras, and cash to Arkansas. And that really built the Clinton evil empire. A lot of people don't understand that. And now it's become an industry, a worldwide industry. And so I just started, I'm on Team America. I took my oath to the Constitution, and I'm trying my best to inform people as to what's going on. And that's a whole nother subject, but that's kind of my sad story.
Wow. Yeah, that's a great background. And you're highly qualified to assess the situation that we're under now. And, many of us who have been in this a long time, realize the shenanigans that have been going on, but they've been largely more hidden. I guess, I don't know if covert or I would say covert from us, not from insiders, but from us normal people out here that don't have those military or intelligence ties. But now in 2020, they just really came right out with it, and everything's being exposed. Literally everything is being exposed, and it's almost like, hey, this is what we're doing, and you can't do a damn thing about it.
Yeah, I agree with that totally. And actually, that's a good thing because it's never been exposed like it has been now. But I totally agree with your assessment. Something I say all the time is concealment is not cover, and all cover is temporary. That's what I'm saying as they're starting to deplatform me on YouTube. But their cover is also blown too. So that's really crucial. Yeah,
and it's becoming obvious who the players are, who's on what side, and I guess that's helpful for us to not have to really guess that much. But there are some areas that are still difficult to navigate for most of us, and maybe you can help us with that, because there seems to be a lot of disinformation and people out there muddying the water for those of us who are trying to figure out what the hell's going on with disinformation, and some people would say hopium, saying that all these wonderful, great things are happening in the background. And that may absolutely be true, but how in the world do those of us who are not, on the inside figure that out?
Well, that's a great assessment. And so I try and stay with actionable intelligence. That is intelligence that we can act on. And we could go back to, the Bilderbergs and the Rothschilds and the Masons, but that's history. That's a history lesson, and I don't do history. I'm trying to do actionable intelligence. So the short version is that when we did the first Gulf War, we knew we had to win it really quickly because we know the media turns against us, and we know that because there's always been fake news. Like fake news was, there's no civilization here in the wilderness in North America, and they're all savages. Fake news goes way back. But the modern fake news is when Walter Cronkite says that the Tet Offensive was a great success for the North Vietnamese and a failure for us when we completely stopped them cold and we won every battle. But because of Walter Cronkite deciding to put out fake news, we won every battle and we lost that war. So what we learned from that is one of the things we have to do is we have to move really quickly before the media turns against us. At first, there'll be the rally around the flag phenomena, but pretty quickly, the news media, the propaganda press, the mainstream media, the drive-by press, whatever you want to call them, will turn against us. So we win really quickly. So we win the first Gulf War really quickly. And part of that is psychological operations of dropping leaflets saying, hey, if you surrender, we'll feed you, we'll give you rations. If you don't, we'll bury you alive. We'll run you over here with our tanks and our dozers. So we had tens of thousands of Iraqis coming out with their guns over their heads. So the vector and the metric was very obvious that our psyops work. And that's why psychological operations and civil affairs is also in Special Operations Command, just like Special Forces, Rangers, SEALs, and all of that. But everybody watches each other. All major powers send guys, colonels, usually majors, to watch each other fight wars. And there were two Chinese Communist Party colonels watching us win. And they made a world-changing assessment. And they realized the mistake that the Imperial Japanese didn't get, and the Nazis didn't get, and ISIS didn't get, and that is nobody can take the American warrior on head on. Nobody. Because of our Judeo-Christian native background, the world has never seen anything like the American warrior. So
and that's
they said,
on a physical level, right?
Well, spiritual too. It really goes to spiritual. And I mean, that would be another conversation, but right. we love life and freedom so much that we'll fight, kill, and die for it. And we love life and freedom so much that we'll send our sons and daughters out to other countries to fight, kill, and die for it. And when we win, and when we're unleashed, we always win. We give the country back. And nobody in the history of the world except us has ever done that. Nobody. And that's what makes us exceptional. And it's not that we don't have our sins. We certainly do. Our major sins are the enslavement of tribal Africans and the genocide, although I know it wasn't an official policy, but the genocide of American tribal Native Americans. Yep. And but everybody's got sins. But on a global scale, we're not big players. If you want to do the math, 75 to 100 million dead in communist China, 30 to 50 million dead in Soviet Union.
Yep, absolutely true.
And any communist country, not that every life isn't valuable, especially the unborn. I certainly know that. But anyway, the point is, because your ethics are formed by your morals are formed by your spiritual beliefs. And when you put our Judeo-Christian and native beliefs together, you get this incredible American warrior. And I'm really proud to be one of them and associate with them. And so anyway, the Chinese go, nobody can take the Americans head on. So they develop a doctrine called unrestricted warfare. And unrestricted warfare is, and it's really Sun Tzu, is we're going to fight them on the business front, which means we're going to have everything made in China. We're going to infiltrate their movies from Midway to Mulan. We're going to pay off their politicians like Hunter Biden and Joe Biden and the Clinton Foundation. And that's how we're going to beat them. And that's what they did. And so there's generations of warfare. Third generation warfare is kind of kinetic.
Right.
Fourth generation warfare is kind of, you're not sure who, they're not in uniform. There's no flags up. There's no lines. And then fifth generation warfare is you can't tell whose side really they're on. But if you look at protests and rallies in Hong Kong, you'll see American flags. You'll see Trump save us. You'll see Second Amendment. If you look at the riots of Blantyfa in the cities in Portland and stuff, you'll see, they don't show it, but you'll see the Chinese Communist Party flag there.
Wow.
So that's fifth generational warfare. And it's covert because you can't see the source. You can't see who's doing what. And it's undeclared war. And so that's very hard for everybody to get talking professionals, to get their head around. And I just have a background in it because I've been doing it a long time.
Sure.
And that's where we are now. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And this is, 100 years ago, guerrilla warfare would have been, somewhat advanced, but now it's just so far beyond that. It's a psychological game. It's a informational warfare game. It's operating on many different levels. You got it operating through social media. You got it operating through mainstream media. You've got it operating through so-called patriot networks, which, some are fake, some are real. It's very difficult for many of us to navigate. We kind of have to go with our gut feeling, I think, in a lot of cases.
Yeah, your intuition is excellent because that's part of our creation. But you're exactly right. So, the first rule of war is to know when you're in one. And a lot of people don't even know that. That's the first thing. The next thing is, who's the enemy? It's very hard to tell who the enemy is. The next thing is, so intelligence we call intelligence preparation of the battlefield. And the battlefield is terrain. And in this fifth generational war, it's really human terrain. And the human terrain is being prepared by just what you're saying: psychological operations, informational operations, influence operations. So yeah, you're right on in your assessment of what's happening. The only other thing is, I say it's global World War IV. I say World War III was global war on terror. I got my service ribbon for that. Global means world war, and this is really, if you look at the French yellow vests, if you look at Brexit, if you look at the Iran, you look at Hong Kong, you look everywhere, but it's global and covert and fifth generational, which makes it very hard for most people to see.
Right. It's super highly organized. Now, I have to ask you, most recently we've seen Washington, D.C. being walled off with fences and all the troops there. Who are those troops serving? Well,
the troops are following their lawful orders, and they will. When I used to give speeches under Obama, people would come up and say, when are the troops going to stage a coup? And I said, they're not. George Washington would turn over in his grave. That's the whole thing. George Washington gave back power after the Revolution, after the first inauguration, and then the second term, and he said that's enough. So they're not going to do that. They're serving who they perceive as the constitutional civil authority.
All right. So they were ordered to go there before the inauguration, right? So who ordered that?
Well, yeah. And this is historic because we've never had troops in Washington like this long. Right. And people are just dumbed down to it. It's terrible. But D.C. mayor, and it's interesting because D.C. is not a state. So those troops can also be federal troops, but other states sent other things. And that's kind of a long...
All right. Well, Jeffrey, hold that thought. We're coming up against a hard break right here. So I want to continue on that little frame of mind there when we come back. So everybody, you're listening to Inside the Matrix with our special guest, Jeffrey Prather. We'll be back in just a little bit, so stick around with us. All right. Welcome back, everybody, to Inside the Matrix. And of course, we want to remind you, if you have any questions for Jeffrey, feel free to pop them in the chat and we'll go over those with you. There's some crazy stuff going on in the world, and it just gets crazier every day. But before the break, we were talking about D.C. and all the troops there and the whole purpose of setting up the fences, around the perimeter of Washington, D.C., and who's actually behind that. So, Jeffrey, if you want to keep going on that, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. So I think the original question was who asked for the troops, and initially I think it was the mayor of D.C. and then mayors and governors of what I call feral cities and feral states, and I kind of got to do a sidebar to that. But you mentioned earlier guerrilla warfare, and that's very appropriate. And so in the old days, guerrilla warfare was you're out in the countryside. We were first fighting guerrillas in Vietnam. And the Tet Offensive was the North Vietnamese Army, regular conventional forces, because you always have to go from unconventional warfare. The final stage of unconventional warfare is conventional warfare. And where that happened, that we know it, is if you've ever watched The Longest Day, the broadcast goes out, Jean has a long mustache, and the Frenchman jumps up and, starts celebrating because that's the code word for, hey, we're coming. Cut the railways, cut the telephone line, everything. And so the unconventional forces then come into play. But that was the countryside. But we learned in Fallujah that because of overhead surveillance is so prevalent and so detailed now, just Google Earth, the stuff I used, was not as good as Google Earth. And so now the guerrillas are in cities. And we learned that through the blood of a lot of great Marines in Fallujah and other places. So
it's a lot harder to find them.
So when you see Portland, for example, or any of these places where Blantifa is coming in, what happens is the businessmen leave, the family people leave, the taxpayers leave, and the police are diminished, and the mayors and governors are bringing in food and water for the rioters. They're really insurgents, and they're taking over those cities. So that's what I call feral cities. And I didn't invent it. It's a special operations doctrine, and that's actually how Trump killed ISIS. And what happened was there were certain Middle Eastern cities that were feral cities. And when Trump finally came in, if you remember all the beheadings, all the terrible things happened with the ISIS under Obama, and Trump just unleashed SOCOM and JSOC, Joint Special Operations Command, on ISIS. And if they were in those cities, that was too bad. So that's what's happening in those feral cities. And those feral cities are now sending, and feral states are sending their guard to D.C. And so there's two reasons for that. One is they're really afraid of the population because they do not hold the population by any means. They don't even hold the population in Portland. Most people in Portland do not support Blantifa. They may be liberals and Democrats, but they don't support all of this because there's no life there. Right. It's just young, childless, single fringe, and nobody wants to live that way. Nobody, most people don't continue to live that way. So they're exporting their feral cities doctrine into D.C. But the scary thing is now that they have created a false flag operation, and that's another, kind of deep dive of D.C. Now they've got the troops, the official troops, holding for them. So the false flag operation is very obvious. So you go back to unrestricted warfare and you infiltrate the politicians, you infiltrate the Department of Justice, you infiltrate the intelligence. So if we look at Obamagate, we know that that the CIA, it was Comey, it was Mifsud, it was all these people. Steele had Dashenko, a Russian agent.
Yep.
And my peer, great intelligence officer Tony Schaefer, said this: "Hey, you got to vet for disinformation." Well, it was all disinformation, but at the same time, they're paying off the judiciary. They're infiltrating the FBI. And that's unrestricted warfare. And you can't fight unrestricted warfare with law enforcement, and you can't fight it with judiciary, just like you can't wage conventional war against unconventional war, asymmetrical war. So that's what's happened in D.C. But this is it's historic for many reasons. One is we've never had troops like this. It feels like it's back to the British troops, The other thing is that it was a huge false flag operation in that if you look at MAGA rallies, and there's been, I don't know how many, hundreds with tens of thousands of people at them, they're peaceful, they're friendly, they clean up after themselves, because they're taxpayers, they're middle America, they're small business. And then you look at the tens of Blantifa riots and violence. There's arsons, there's lootings, there's rapes, shootings, all of this destruction. But then all of a sudden, at one rally in D.C., all of a sudden the roles are reversed. Well, citizen journalists like yourself have now, there's video out there of the Blantifa guys going from city to city, same guys, Sullivan, others. You can see them changing from their black stuff into their MAGA stuff.
Right.
You can delineate the covert operations, which are difficult for most people to understand, but the crowd is the cover, or rather the crowd is the concealment. So you bring a lot of people, you got to look for the leaders in there. You can see this in the Portland covert shootings where there's leaders, there's scouts, and he said, in the Portland assassination, goes, hey, pull it out. There's the guy, shoot him. The shooter shoots him. Clean team comes in and picks up the brass. Blockers come in as fake medics. Cars come in and block things off. Same thing happened. I can't remember where that other shooting was, but he was saying, frack around and find out, frack around and find out. That was another covert assassination. That was the same thing with Ashley Babbitt. It was another covert assassination. You can see the Capitol undercover police coordinating with the uniformed SWAT guy, thumbs up. And by the way, I do believe she was shot. I know friends of mine don't, but I do. And I'm a longtime firearms instructor. I've seen a lot of shootings. But they control those events because the terrain is really human. And so then from there, they said, hey, we can't have violence. Well, you've had violence for a whole year, and you have praised it, you've paid for it, you have backed it, you've advocated for it, all the Blantifa violence, and all of a sudden you're saying, oh, we can't have violence. Well, this is just psychological operations. This is informational warfare. But the big thing that happens here is they then get the official troops to come in. And they do that for two reasons. They get control of the area. And so one thing I thought might happen there would be a false flag attack. I had intelligence to that effect.
I thought so too.
Didn't seem to happen. But what would have happened is, they've got the area cordoned off. The FBI comes in. Well, the FBI, and I graduated from the FBI Academy in 1990, okay, because there wasn't a DA Academy. I worked with the hero of the Miami gunfight, Ed Morales, personal friend of mine. So, I know where the FBI was good, and, but the FBI is now just a cleanup team, the covert cleanup team for the deep state, which is mostly the intelligence community, which is mostly the CIA, where they control, what's going on. Now, the other side of that is that they bring the troops in and they treat the troops like crap, which is what they do with anybody who's not elite. And that came out, sleeping on the floor and then sleeping in the parking garage. Right. One porta potty for 5,000 troops. I know what that smells like. One power source for guys to talk to their kids and family, while they're sitting around. So yeah, the troops are there, but do you think they're moving at speed when these guys ask for something, or do you think they're moving in slow motion?
Well, that brings into mind another thing that was going around, was saying that when Biden came into town, that the troops had turned their back to his motorcade. Is that true? Do you know anything about that?
Yes, some of them did and some of them didn't. But there were units that just kind of stood around. There were units that came to attention, and there were units that turned their back. But that's very, very significant because when you are trying to wage unconventional warfare, asymmetrical warfare, low-intensity conflict, irregular warfare, discretionary warfare, you have to have the population. The communists really know how to do this really well. And so what you do is you get the government to become you attack the government So the government becomes really overbearing. And so that's why you see Blantifa attacking federal buildings, attacking police, attacking anything of the government. And they're even now, but one of the problems is they're saying, hey, frack Biden, because they want power.
That was funny.
Once you unleash the mob, same thing happened in Benghazi. You can't ever put the mob back in the bottle. And they want power. And they're turning on each other. You can't control that. That's what happened really with Benghazi as well. But then, so here's I know it sounds bad, but here's the good news. Most of Portland does not support Blantifa. And that's like, that's like deep state. Well, that's, total feral city. And then DC is the headquarters for the deep state. And Obama and Valerie Jarrett got their compound, their tactical operations center, their TOC nearby, where they're running this, and they're the shadow government, and they're running this whole thing. But the troops aren't behind them because they've seen how they treat them.
Yeah.
So they don't have the population, they don't have the troops, they certainly don't have the police because the police have been totally abandoned.
Yep.
So even though it looks bleak, and it is. This is really rough times. Q isn't coming to the rescue. Trump is not coming to the rescue. I don't buy into any of that. But they do not hold the human terrain. That would be the most important thing I would say to your audience.
Okay, I've got a question from our good friend, the Florida chick, in the chat here, and she's asking, she would like to know your perspective on Trump's activation of JFK's National Security Action Memos 55, 56, and 57 that are intended to return the CIA to a role of intelligence gathering only. Was Trump's move purely symbolic? And is there any possibility the Pentagon will refuse further support of the CIA's covert military actions? Boy, that's a good question.
Yeah, so you have a smart audience, and Florida Chick is really smart. And yes, so anybody who has got their head in the fight understands that JFK was a patriot. He would not be part of the Democratic Party today, PT 109. And he was going to diminish the CIA. He Eisenhower warned about the military-industrial complex, which really morphed into the military-industrial deep state, and he was going to destroy it. And so that's where the assassination comes in, and that's a whole another subject. Right. But yeah, he wanted to return it to what it was supposed to be, and it was never really what it was supposed to be, because during World War II we had the Office of Strategic Services, which was great.
Which became later the CIA with the Nazis, right?
Right, and two things came out of the OSS, and one was the CIA, and one was Army Special Forces, Green Berets. And Green Berets are fabulous, and CIA, has never been worth much, in my opinion. And again, I have, taught at the farm, and know lots of case officers and understand what a case officer is and the role. But you look right after the next war, Korea War, what happens? Nothing. What happens? Endless war. It's a draw. You go to Vietnam, what happens? Nothing. Endless war. Yes, she understands correctly what that was, and Trump, and this is kind of the Kennedy-Trump tie-in. But was Trump's move purely symbolic to refuse support of the CIA covert military actions? No, it wasn't symbolic, because what he did there at the end was he put Chris Miller, who is a horse soldier, and if your audiences haven't seen 12 Strong or read the book Horse Soldiers, they should definitely do that, because a couple of Green Beret teams went into Afghanistan and wiped out the Taliban in a couple months. It changed special operations doctrine, and Chris Miller was a horse soldier. So Trump put in a guy who knew how to operate in unconventional warfare behind enemy lines, which he was in D.C. Wow. And then he put Ezra Cohen-Watnick, who I say is Q, ahead of special operations and intelligence, because the other branches kind of got, except for Air Force and Space Force, got infiltrated. Mattis, I can't think of the other generals' names, but Space Force, because you want the high ground, and there's no higher ground than space. So with the cyber attacks, everything was hacked except for Air Force and Space Force. So he was trying to do that, but one of my shows, I did what we'd call a hot wash. Is I'm like, okay, we're going to go over what happened, and for the first part of the show, I praised Trump and said, he's one of the greatest presidents of all time, and 3 Nobel Prize nominations is not enough, and he may be the most popular president since George Washington, who was our first rock star, but there were things that he did wrong, and we're going to go over those. I think not to criticize him, but to do better the next time. That's just what a hot wash is. And so, my main point, without going into all of them, because that was an hour show in itself, is Trump was going against Biden. Well, Biden was never a legitimate opposition candidate to Trump. Nope. And they didn't even try. And I mean, he couldn't do anything against Trump.
He didn't even campaign, really.
No, he didn't.
He never got out there.
No. So Trump was doing what he's supposed to do, following the law, having rallies, counting on the system. And meanwhile, the Chinese were waging unrestricted warfare with the Iranians and other people, but mainly it's the Chinese. And they were then paying corrupt politicians like Hunter and Joe and the Clintons and all these other, and
Pelosi, Schumer,
and the governor in Georgia and all that had met, and Akamai and Dominion, and they weren't even concentrating on that. So did Trump understand? So remember, we're going to go back to the basics. Is the first rule of war is to know when you're in one. And so did Trump really realize he was in a war? And I'm not sure he did. And I'm not sure that's his fault, because he should have advisors around him that's saying, hey, sir, this 5th generation unrestricted warfare. And I don't think he did. I think he was it's obvious. He was infiltrated. He was surrounded by traitors.
He was absolutely surrounded by traitors. Yep. That's
and
obvious.
I know what it's like to be betrayed. I have been betrayed over and over. I had the deep state come after me for 15 years, federally and locally. But I probably haven't been betrayed as much as Trump has been betrayed. So I know what it's like. I got a letter from him. My daughter got a letter from him. But that's why all the firings over and over and over, because he's trying to rely on a system. And I think he finally got the right mix, which was Horse Soldier and Ezra in there and Space Force. But I think it was too late and too little. And I think he tried to do more, but I just don't think people were carrying out what he wanted carried out. At the end, I was saying he's got to go kinetic in feral cities, and he's got to go kinetic against China. And that's a pretty, dramatic.
That's heavy duty, because when you say kinetic, that means ships, planes, guns, and missiles.
Now what the propaganda press doesn't report is we have been challenging the China Navy. We have been doing that. And we've even challenged the Russians on the ground. And we've challenged the Iranians. That the propaganda press doesn't report it, but it's been happening. But the other part of that, and the reason you got to do that is because that's who's paying the traders. When you're going to run a source, you pay them. And you pay them for access and then influence. And that's exactly what the Chinese did with Hunter and Joe. Exactly.
Well, it's so obvious, and it got totally covered up and buried. And they, it really saddens me, because a lot of my friends and people that I know are so taken in by mainstream media and think it's legit. They think that what they say is true, and it's so obviously propaganda and just cover for the deep state. But if you don't have any kind of a background, and you're not somebody that's very curious and wanting to find out, really what's happening, people are just taking their word for it from the mainstream media. And of course, Trump, there's a lot of things I disagree with Trump on, but it should be really obvious that when all of the mainstream media completely goes after and vilifies somebody, that you've got to think to yourself, this guy must be an enemy to this establishment in some way, right?
Oh yeah, I've had people, say, "Oh, Trump was in on it." No, he wasn't. That's like Yeshua when they say to Yeshua, "Oh, he's casting out demons via Satan." No, he goes, "How can Satan cast out Satan?" Q was a psyop. I don't buy into. I'm not a Q guy totally, but the fundamentals make sense. And Flynn was DIA. I didn't work for him at DIA, but worked for other generals, Jacoby and admirals at DIA. You don't ban a psyop. But again, you don't say trust the plan, because no plan survives the first 5 minutes of implementation. Plans are useless. Planning is invaluable. And there's still people saying, Trump's got the football and stuff like that. And that's not realistic. That's the bad news. The good news is they do not hold the human terrain. And that's crucial in fifth generational warfare.
So, given that, and I would say I would guess that the military is split, because you've got a lot of these generals and admirals and high up people that have been totally bought and paid for, and they're going to, go along with the plan that they've been paid to do. And then you've got people that are really and honestly trying to fight for our freedom and represent us. So it's very interesting. And I want to get into that a little more. We're coming up against a break once again, Jeffrey. So everybody, we'll be back in just a little bit after this commercial break. So please stick around with us and our guest, Jeffrey Prather. We'll be right back. Okay, welcome back, everybody. I hope that you all are having a good time today with us. We're certainly enjoying our conversation. And before the break, we were starting to touch on who out there, and especially in the military and the police, are on our side, the side of we the people. And Jeffrey, do you have any assessment of any idea of maybe percentage-wise of the military and how they feel about what's going on? I mean, obviously they're shielded to some extent, especially the lower levels, but they're on the higher levels, the generals and the people in the Pentagon, they surely must know what's going on, right?
Well, so generals are kind of like politicians for the most part. And this is very typical of, if you just look at the Civil War, how many generals did Lincoln have to go through before he got somebody who would fight? But just one follow-up to Florida Chick's question on further non-Pentagon support for the CIA's covert military actions. Chris Miller actually did say that the CIA was not supposed to be able to do any more covert military actions. So that's called Special Activities Division, SAD, within the CIA, and they're all ex-military. If you've seen 13 Hours, those are ex-SEALs doing ground branch SAD stuff. And so that will key into that, because they'll still do it. And they'll probably reverse it, but the military will have gotten, especially the special operations community, who understands that relationship, because the Army Special Forces, Green Berets, get chopped to the CIA all the time. But they're not going to go along with that like they did, and they're going to be a lot more reluctant. All of us in the community are very well aware of Benghazi, and we could have got to those guys. There was plenty of assets that we could have saved those guys. Right. They could have saved the ambassador, and we could have saved them. And that was turned off. All of law enforcement is very well aware of Fast and Furious, and that, LEOs have been killed, including Mexican LEOs, by Fast and Furious guns. So that's really key. in that the lower troops don't really know. They're young and they don't really know what's going on because of their information sources are very controlled. The top brass, the generals, are for the most part bought off because when Obama came in, he fired about 200, 250 field from my rank of major to stars, got rid of them. And he did the same thing in the intelligence community. He did the same thing in the federal law enforcement community. And that's why you see there's so many Comeys and Brennans and Mattis's in there, just so many levels, because he made a lot of SESs, Special Executive Service guys, which are very hard to fire. So the swamp is very deep. But then if you get into the mid-level ranks and you get into the special operations community, then those guys and gals know what's going on. And, they're going to be moving in slow motion on anything. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, but you saw the same thing with Trump when he was trying to do things. He had all these senior executive service people and bureaucrats in all these different departments, just slow walking everything and really trying to sabotage a lot of the efforts, which would have benefited the people. So I'm hoping that there's enough, people that understand what's going on and do want to be free and live in a free nation or free republic, as opposed to the ones who are perfectly okay with the whole globalist agenda.
Well, that movement is growing every day. The walkaway movement grew under Trump, and it will continue to grow under Trump. So, the Trump tribe is 75 million, probably more. There's probably, a whole bunch more that are quiet. Those guys just aren't going to go away. And again, the Democrats have alienated law enforcement. They've alienated the military. And they're going to continue to alienate. Biden isn't going to do press briefings. There's going to be more control. Blantifa, which is the armed militia of the Democratic Party, on a show a while back, I put out, hey, if you click on Blantifa, Antifa, I say Blantifa, I'm combining BLM and Antifa,
right?
But BLM's kind of faded now that they've been used. But if you click on Antifa.com, it goes to whitehouse.gov. It did a couple weeks ago. I don't know if it still does. And before that, it went to Biden's campaign. Just like
right.
BLM used to go to Act Blue, which went to Biden, which went back to Germany, to BLM Germany, which went back to Saudis and China and other terrorist groups. So it's going to be rough. It's going to be very slow, and it's going to look a lot more like the Obama years. It's going to look a lot more like Venezuela. But they're going to have a hard time holding all of this terrain because people are going to get more and more. So it's not the vaccine's out, and we're supposed to wear 2 masks now. Okay,
Oh my God.
Even though most people don't realize that it's 99% survivable, there's no child to adult rate. The IFR, the infection fatality rate, mortality rate is at 78, which is the regular mortality rate for Americans. So this is going to get old, and it's going to get very clunky to be able to work. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And but I always feel like they're going to wring this thing out to the very end until it just doesn't work anymore, and then they're going to come up with some other new kind of bullshit to restrict people. And my observation on this mask thing is it's basically obedience training. It's just like, you train your dog to follow your commands and do what you want him to, or him or her to do. And this is human obedience training. Wear your mask, social distance, lock your business down. I mean, this is in your face, mind control, psychological control. And why people cannot see that is just beyond me. And it's just so frustrating that they cannot do so.
Well, it is. You're right. It's a psychological operation metric. Are you being a good little slave? Are you being a good little commodity? And again, so the deep state, the dark economy runs the deep state, and the dark economy is really human beings, drugs, and weapons.
Right.
And there's a new spin-off of the dark economy, and that's the mask economy. Everybody's got, custom masks and face shields and full masks, and so that just because they can control all that. And again, it didn't start with Oliver North, but he certainly really turned the Clintons loose, running with the CIA, running Contras and cash and cocaine from Arkansas to Nicaragua. But nobody really likes that, and the younger generation especially is eventually going to become very rebellious of that. All you got to do is look at the models. You look at China. The Chinese have to oppress churches. Why? Because there's secret Christian prayer meetings in China. They're taking all the crosses down, but Christianity leads to freedom. Same thing with personal weaponry brings personal liberty. So how are they going to control all this? Well, their plan is to control this through big government, big tech, big pharma, which is what the vaccine is.
Right.
And it ties right back to China. Big box stores and big business, which kills the engine of middle America, which is small business. That's what all this is about. And that's what they're trying. But the more they try and do that, the more it's going to become more difficult. They took me off the radio, and I went. My audience just went 100 times its size and went international. And citizen journalists like yourself keep springing up. It's like mercury, and so that's what they are going to continue to try and stop. And they're not going to be able to stop it in the end. It's not going to be easy. It's not trust the plan. Q's got this, or Trump's got this, or God's got this. But tyrants always fall, and freedom in life does always find a way.
I've always felt like we need, now there's a whole bunch of new platforms, YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and all these other social media platforms have been cracking down and deleting profiles and just taking people off that really go against the communist deep state agenda. So I always felt like we need our own platform, but we're being divided again by getting off of those platforms. Now there's like 4 or 5 other platforms that have popped up, and now you basically have to be on all of those to get the word out to people. It would be great if we had if we were able to sort of commandeer one of the major networks and begin putting the truth out to people. It would be far more effective, I think, because I always say Betty Bonbons and Joe Sixpack out there are not seeing the information that they need to see to become informed, unless they're out there digging for it.
Well, they're learning how to dig, and the left elite always underestimates the working class and flyover America. It was Bloomberg, I think, said, "Hey, what is there to grow in crops? Just put the seed in the dirt, pour some water on it, it'll grow." He obviously knows nothing about farming or ranching. How do you know when to plant? Well, about 20 or 30 years, you start to figure it out. It's very difficult, very sophisticated experiential wisdom. Has no clue. But that's the same thing with Stalin. That was the same thing with the Khmer Rouge. Hey, we'll just send the intelligentsia out there to do all that. But look at Fox. Fox was reined in. You saw, I can't think of the black lady's name. She's got a house down here in Tubac on the air. She goes, "Oh, we can't talk about Soros. Somebody's talking in her ear." So the decentralization of all the platforms like yours and mine will ensure the invincibility and resiliency of what is happening.
Well, that's a good point. Yeah.
That is insurgency. So what I say is the republic has fallen But the revolution to restore the republic has began. And the objective is to destroy the deep state. And how you destroy the deep state is through fake news. Well, I don't know anybody who's listening still. I mean, I look at them for intelligence purposes. I don't look at them for news, the big three, because it's good comedy. But I gotta do my intelligence. But who's watching that? Well, older hippie left wingers are the ones who's watching that. Are kids watching that? No, they're not. Now they are very much controlled by the sources that they are listening to, which is primarily big tech. But they are going to start to do what kids and teens always do, and that is rebel and look for alternate sources. And as they start to do that, they're going to start to discover alternate platforms. And because who's running? Look at who's running this. Biden.
Well, he's not running anything. I think we all know that, right?
Right. That's true. Yeah, he's a figurehead, and Harris, but there's no interest of those platforms at all. So that's going to occur. It's not going to be fun. It's going to be expensive, and it could get kinetic. And Trump's not going to go away, and 75 plus million Trump supporters are not going to go away. And I have fans all over the world all the time calling me. So that is going to be a very difficult way for them to hold. But it's not going to be pleasant. It's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be quick.
Yeah, unfortunately. But like we said earlier, though, it's becoming a lot easier to recognize the enemy, because it doesn't matter if you're Republican or Democrat. Those are just sort of nondescript labels nowadays. It's what really matters is to see people who are bought and paid for, and those who actually are attempting to do what they were supposed to do, and that's serve we the people. And the whole idea of government ruling over us is anathema to the Constitution. But the Constitution has been ignored for so long, it just doesn't even seem relevant to those people anymore. It's just crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. I've been a guest and a bodyguard, like for Dinesh D'Souza and Sheriff Walker and lots of guys like that over the years.
Oh, great.
Ty Wood's wife, I did that one for free. Ty Wood was the ex-SEAL, sad guy, killed in Benghazi.
Right.
But a lot of these guys are talking about the Constitution, about bringing lawsuits, and about election fraud proof. And my answer is, your head's not in the fight. You don't understand the fight. If you're still talking about arrests and proofs and evidence, your head's not in the fight. You don't understand what's going on. And you got to understand what's going on to counter that. And you got to understand that every platform, there's no secure communications, and that every platform is compromised and is being listened to. And once you understand the fight and you understand how it's working, then you can begin to counter what's going on. I'm on patreon.com, and I have a lot of Patreon supporters. And one of my Patreon supporters said, "Hey, I've been listening to you really closely, and you don't tell us what to do. You tell us what to do by not telling us what to do, by telling us what the enemy is doing." And I wrote back to him, "Your head's in the fight."
Well, we'll spell it out for our listeners, some of your ideas on what we can actually do. And I agree with you that if you're trying to fight them with their own system, it never has worked and it's never going to work. So we have to become asymmetrical in some way too, right?
Right. And that is difficult to spell out because we all have to be careful. So I will give you a parable. So okay. I had to take my car in for some work, and the shop was waiting to open up, and at the front of the shop, all the sheeple were out there with their masks on. And I started to walk by him, and the guy goes, "Hey, get in line." I'm like, "No worries, I'm not getting in line." And I walked around to the back of the garage because I know all the guys there, and they're not wearing masks. And they're like, "Hey, Jeff, how you doing? Hey, and I'm like, "Hey, I need to get this done. Can you help me?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, sure." And so then, I drove my car around back while all the sheeple with their masks are waiting out front. And so what that is what they have done, and we are redoing, is a shadow government is what Obama put in place. And he's running the government with his shadow government, with all the people he's put in place. And so every time Trump tries to do something, but the same thing starts to happen. This is what happens in a tyranny in a communist country is if there's always going to be some kind of capitalism, some kind of trade, and so it just goes underground and it just becomes black market. And as you develop those underground connections and black market connections, things still work. And as you develop those communities and circles, that's where things happen. So that's where you can't count on the police to come. So you're going to have your own neighborhood watch and security. You certainly don't want to say militia. It's like the Wolverines, the guys in, as soon as they said that was an FBI informant. And we just saw the same thing, I think, with the Proud Boy guy. He's an FBI informant. So anybody who comes into your neighborhood watch and says, "Hey, let's get a target or something," that's what the FBI does now. Is they find some hapless Muslim and says, "Hey, do you not like the government? No. You want to blow something up? Yeah. You got any explosives? No. You got a target? No. Well, here's a target. Here's some fake explosives, and we'll run the whole thing, and then we'll arrest you, and we'll say we wrapped up another."
Foiled another plot, right?
Right. That used to be called entrapment, and we never did it in the DEA. We had to actually, if we were doing a reverse drug sale, we actually had to sell real drugs and take it off. Otherwise, when you go to court, then you're no different than the drug dealer.
Exactly.
But
hey, Jeffrey, we've got another question from the chat. I wanted to get in here real quick before the break. Brandy on Twitter is asking, people are being deplatformed on YouTube, and you see what they did to Parler and just taking that down completely. How can we have a different voice if there is a conscious effort from all the big tech companies to limit free speech?
Yeah, I lost about 140,000 supporters on Parler as well, and they're talking about Telegram right now as well. And as they do that, though, they are destroying their own networks, and YouTube is doing that. And CNN is doing that, and Fox is doing it. Fox went down 40%. We will always find another way to communicate to each other. And I'm an old guy, right? And guess what? We didn't always have iPhones and the internet and text, and we did fine. And actually, that's secure communications. But what I'm always saying to everybody is, it's time to neighbor up. So that is, go talk in the 4 directions around your neighborhood, and you're going to find out who agrees with you and who doesn't agree with you. Okay. And then from that, you're going to team up and say, well, in my neighborhood, I live out in the country, but if somebody has a problem, I'm always there. I'm always responding.
That's the way it should be. Sure.
And that's the way it always was. And then after years of doing that, they're going to respond and help me. And then we're going to start exchanging skill sets. I get, stuff from people. Hey, if you need to come up to this state, if you need over here, if you need a doctor for hydrochloroquine, if you need this. And so that goes to the underground economy and the shadow state of the shadow state. And that's how it's going to have to be. Again, it's not going to be easy, and people are going to have to get out of their comfort zone, and saying, how do we, people ask me, how do we take back the country? And they're asking me on an open platform like YouTube or something.
Yeah.
So you don't understand the fight then if you're saying that.
Yeah.
That's just like saying, what about the election fraud proof? Well, it's never been seen. SCOTUS wouldn't see it.
Yep, that's right, and they never will, as long as we've got these paid actors in there. Anyway, we're coming up against another hard break, Jeffrey. Great information that we're getting from you. We really appreciate it. We're going to take a short pause right here. You're listening to Inside the Matrix with Jeffrey Prather today. We'll be back in just a little bit. All right, welcome back, everybody, to our final segment here today on Inside the Matrix with Jeffrey Prather. We were talking on the break a little bit with Jeffrey, and one of the things that we need to discuss is this whole GameStop thing, where with all these big investment houses short selling the stock in order to make a ton of money, but then all of a sudden some investors came along and they were saying that it was just a bunch of kids that were gamers that decided to buy the stock and keep it inflated so that they could never reap the benefits of their short sales. So, Jeffrey, tell us about that.
So that's another covert operation run by the CCP. Again, the CCP is the source. Like, I've run lots of human sources or confidential informants, whatever you want to call them, whether it was law enforcement or whether it's intelligence. And you always want to get the highest source possible. Like I've said earlier on the show, if you couldn't get Joe directly, although they did, they got Hunter. The CCP got Hunter. They brought him in, they addicted him, and then they fed him Chinese children, and then they extorted him with the 3 hard drives. That's how you control somebody, carrot and stick. With COVID-19, it was a bioweapon out of Wuhan, without a doubt, but it really wasn't meant to kill. It's a 99% survival rate. It was meant to do economic battle and stop the United States economy. It worked too well. It stopped the world economy and made China a pariah. But it was a psychological operations vector, even though it was a bioweapon, and it was used for economic battle. And so now, what's happening now, this unrestricted warfare doctrine that's been unfolding for the last 20 years is more sophisticated than Operation Overlord, than the invasion, than the D-Day invasion, with all those elements, the sea elements, the airborne elements. It is even more sophisticated than that. So Reddit was raising $150 million in 2019, and the Chinese tech giant Tencent, and any Chinese company is really the CCP. It's nation state. Gave them $150 million. Well, Reddit is one of the most free, censorship-free platforms. There's good stuff, there's nasty stuff on there. And so Reddit eventually confirmed that it raised $300 million at $3 billion post money with $150 million. So that's a great deal for the Chinese. But the Chinese are all about censorship. So why are the Chinese going for a free speech platform? This wasn't gamers doing that. There's no way to coordinate that kind of movement. What happened is they spooked the investors to dump GameStop, and so why GameStop? Because that's where young folks are. That's where you can psychologically influence them through games, and AMC theaters. Why theaters? Because theaters are a really good way to get out psychological operations message. Think Black Panther, think Captain America. The Marvel movies like Captain America, the World War II hero, was the most popular. And so they controlled that through all these, again, unrestricted warfare people they had bought off to control and coordinated that. And now that is soaring, but this is really scary, is that now the CCP is going to control this very free speech platform. And the way they're manipulating the economic battle is very, very dangerous, very, very scary. And that is a big problem, and almost nobody seems to be aware of it. And the other analogy would be with the George Floyd thing. Everybody's focusing on the deception operation, the distraction operation, which was the corrupt cop kneeling on George Floyd. Nobody talked about how the initial stop was based on a $20 counterfeit bill. And there was 100,000 counterfeit bills that came into the city from China. So what that really was, I believe, was a corrupt cop gang running an informant, Floyd, really, but those were the proxies really for the CCP, because Customs and Border Protection had been intercepting hundreds of thousands of counterfeit currency. And when you want to destroy somebody's currency in warfare, you just bring in counterfeit currency and you inflate it till it's worthless.
Yep. Well, kind of what the Federal Reserve has been doing for the last 100 years, right? Only on a sped up scale.
Yep. And that's one reason why, people, and I understand why Native Americans don't like the Jackson portrait, because he treated natives terribly. Trail of Tears said, hey, Supreme Court, you enforce your ruling. But Jackson also got rid of the Fed. And I think that's because Trump did a lot for actual Native folks and gave federalization to tribes. But
Old Hickory stood up to the private bankers where nobody else did. And they tried to kill him too. Right.
Yep. And they've tried to kill. There's been at least 20 assassination attempts that I'm aware of. And now Trump. And now they're even trying to do more as they try and get him out of Mar-a-Lago and everything.
All right. Well, something else before we, time always flies by on our show. But one thing I really was curious about, and I'm sure you've heard all this information too, and I want to get your take on it, is that there's all these DUMBs, or deep underground military bases, and some of them purported to be alien controlled, that is non-human species controlled, some U.S. military or other military groups, and that these underground facilities are being systematically taken out. There's a lot of people talking about that. Is there any truth to that? And what do you think about it?
Well, what I always say is, if aliens are, first of all, I'm a big science fiction guy, and certainly I believe there's alien life out there. And when you're trying to trans space, it's so vast that you're going to have to do some kind of dimensional, wormhole, warp drive, whatever you want to talk about. And it's really just another dimension. And we certainly know there's more dimensions than the three that we live in. Right. So are there transdimensional beings? Yeah. You want to call them aliens? Okay. You want to call them angels? Okay. You want to call them demons? Okay. You want to call them Bob? Okay. Doesn't really matter to me what you call them. I certainly believe, and through my spiritual experience, have had experience with that. Are there DUMBs? Well, certainly. Cheyenne Mountain is certainly one. I think the Nashville penetrator. I think that there was a Nashville stealth drone that penetrated down below there. I think that's very common. There's a lot of child slavery? Certainly, I have run across that. I work with spec ops guys that know about that. Very true. All those elements are there, but I don't go for there's Marines down in tunnels, and they're releasing kids from cages. Now, there have been a lot of U.S. Marshals, and I know a lot of U.S. Marshals who have stopped a lot of child trafficking. And again, that's part of the deep state economy. Plus, it's morally correct thing to do. So, yeah, I see all those elements, and I validate all of those elements. I think that most people have kind of a shallow, kind of cartoonish way of looking at that stuff. But yeah, I certainly agree with all of those elements, if that answers your question.
Well, okay, yeah, but is there a systematic operation ongoing that is trying to eradicate the dark side that exists in those underground places?
Yeah, there is. There's not this, I forget who this guy is that says there's a Pentagon task force of special operations. There's not that, but there's certainly a lot of special operations and ex-special operations guys stopping child slavery, Underground Railroad. There's other organizations that are much more lower profile. I have proudly been involved in some child rescue stuff, very low profile. And then because you hear all the time, U.S. Marshals rescued these kids. Well, where'd those kids come from? Where'd that happen? How'd they find that out? Where's the backstory? Well, there isn't a lot of backstory to that. So there is certainly an effort to do that. If you look at what Trump did, he stopped the transnational cartels from coming up through Mexico. He had Mexico put troops on the border, and I've worked the Guatemala and Mexico border. I've worked the Mexican Arizona border, and all the way down to Chile and everything in between. He finally stopped the covert gun running, weapon running. That was Fast and Furious, that was Benghazi, and that was Syria, and he finally stopped that. And he had a lot of children being rescued. So he was actually stopping all the three main pillars of the dark economy, which is another reason to just love him to death. So, but will those efforts be turned off and redirected now? Yeah, they will be officially. But a lot of that will go on. A lot of guys get out and continue to do that.
So, but Jeffrey, don't you know that Trump is a racist, misogynist, probably the worst person the world has ever known, and most likely a Nazi and everything else, according to mainstream media?
Yeah, the one thing I can tell you is whatever they're saying, they're doing. I've learned that the hard way. Whatever they're accusing us of, they're actually doing. I mean, just look at Biden sniffing kids and groping kids, and Hunter. Don't look at the photos because that's a federal felony, but very reliable sources of the 3 hard drives. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about.
Oh yeah,
where he was set up, and then Ashley Biden's diary talking about showering with dad, and the Secret Service guy gals talking
Biden's daughter, right?
Yeah, that's Biden's daughter, and also the female Secret Service on his detail talking about him jumping in the pool nude. And you can see all the video evidence of it. You saw it with Obama. You saw Obama grabbing a little Asian girl in the office and on the boat with George Clooney. But the propaganda press controls all that.
And Big Mike, of course.
Yeah. I don't know whether it's Big Mike or Michelle. And really what I say is it's irrelevant. I've seen the stuff, could be. But again, let's stay on the actionable intelligence and focus on restoring our republic and defeating the deep state.
Yeah, well, my point in bringing stuff like that up is to show people how easy, number one, how easy it is to fool you with lots of stuff. And number two, how insanely crazy these people are, to parade around it the way they do. And most people's understanding of reality is so far from the truth. It's ridiculous. And it's a sad thing, because if you're going from square one and you don't understand any of this information, and all of a sudden you come across somebody or group or whatever that's talking about all these things that we've been talking about today, most people cannot handle that kind of a leap. That is so far from their reality. It's going to rattle their cage so severely that they're just going to outright deny it and just, walk away thinking, those people are crazy, right?
Yeah, and yet it keeps coming out. And you just have to talk about it in an intelligent fashion. And, I get notes all the time saying, I love your measured, calm tone. And then it begins to make sense. But, there's crowds outside Buckingham Palace saying pedophiles, shouting pedophiles. Yeah. That's never happened before.
Right.
Concealment is not cover, and all cover is temporary. and their cover is temporary as well. And they are so worried that they have to station armed military and put flags instead of people at this false inauguration. So it's not fun. It's not pretty. And I won't say we're winning right now. I will say we will win because tyrants always fall. But it's going to be expensive and difficult and a long process. But with informational warfare, it's the truth will out. With psychological operations, the truth will out. And of course, there's always kinetics. There's been kinetics with Blantifa. But you know what I'm trying to tell people is what the battlefield looks like, and that's what people are starting to understand now, and that's the most important thing.
Yeah, and I think non-cooperation is the key to a lot of us winning, and but that doesn't happen unless you've got a rather substantial change in consciousness for people to recognize what they're up against and to see the world for what it is and see the structures, the political organizations, the governmental organizations, the corporations, the media, and all those things as they are and not as they would hope them to be or as they were told that they are. And so to me, that's the battle, is getting that information out to people. And when enough of us actually grok all that information, I think that, that's when the game is over and we can be non-cooperative and be effective. If all of a sudden tomorrow enough, 300 million people woke up and said, you know what, we're going to open up our businesses. We're not going to wear masks. And on top of that, we're not going to get any dang, quack scenes. And then it's game over. But we've got a long ways to go to get to that state of consciousness.
Well, I'm a big fan of Robert Heinlein and read Stranger in a Strange Land and read Starship Troopers. So I catch your grok there. And I agree with that totally. But, again, people used to ask me under Obama, when's the military going to coup? And I'm like, they're not. But the other thing was, if they did, so even if Biden puts in martial law, which he could, or the puppet masters behind him put in martial law, what's that going to look like? Do we have enough troops to hold the country? And then are the troops and our troops have never been better. They've been fighting longer and harder than the World War II generation, and the rapport and respect of the population for the troops has never been higher. Is that going to happen, or are they just kind of slow walk and go through the motions? And
yeah, and are those troops willing to fire on their own people?
I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
And I don't know how you would hold the country. Yeah, I mean, you can hold the metrosexual coasts. You can hold, the masked morons in the cities, but you're not going to hold everything else. And do the countryside, the farmers and ranchers need the cities, or do the cities need the country guys?
Oh, the cities definitely need the country guys.
Okay, so that's what this starts to look like. And what happens when Blantifa tries to push out into the country?
Oh, that would not go well. So I almost hope they'll try that, because that will not go well. Yeah. So
that's what the field looks like. That's what everybody needs to understand. And they are so afraid that they have to censor and control and lie. I saw Rand Paul being interviewed by I think it was Stephanopoulos. He goes, "Well, will you say that the election wasn't stolen?" They want the words right away. Hey, will you get your mind right and say what you're supposed to say? And he wouldn't say that. There's a reason why they want to do that, because they obviously know that people don't believe it, and it's going to get worse.
Yeah, and it becomes more obvious all the time, like you said before. Your point is well taken, that there are more people catching on, and that's what gives me hope. I've known about a lot of these things, as you have, for decades, but it was mostly hidden. it was mostly unseen and unheard by the populace as a whole. But the difference now with the internet and with all the things that we have, the capabilities that we have to communicate, not just locally but worldwide, that's going to be they're unending, I think.
Well, you've probably seen the people yelling at Romney.
Oh yeah, that was great.
You've seen the people yelling at different politicians all the time, and that's a cue thing is, hey, they won't be able to walk down the streets. Well, are they walking down streets? No, they're not walking down streets.
Yeah. And now they're going to avoid them even more.
Yeah. So they've got, what I like to say is the deep state headquarters is D.C. And the feral cities, they have fallen. And the metrosexual coasts, they have fallen. But other than that, we surround them. And, I always say this, Yamamoto knew this very clearly, that you could never invade the United States. So will they dare with the next step, which is, disarm everybody? There's lots of talk about AR pistol grips and all that kind of stuff, pistol stocks. They've
already got the legislation pending for all of that stuff.
Yeah, they do. So I've got, 2 shoulder surgeries, a hemocap in my shoulder, or a hip replacement. And, I've been rode hard and put away wet by the government. But what happens when you make 75 million Americans and all the veterans and all the law enforcement criminals?
Yeah, that's not going to go well for them.
No.
Anyway, Jeffrey, I don't want to get too far down. We only got a couple of minutes left here, and I want you to tell people where they can find you and your show and all the things that you're doing, your website. Go ahead and let them know that.
So I'm at jeffreyprather.com, JEFFREY, not ERY, but REY, because the ERY is a fake site. REYPRATHER.com. That's my main site. And I'm on Patreon if you want to see all my articles and back stuff. And I have lots of other websites, but jeffreyprather.com will take you to my other stuff like warriorschool.com and christchaplaincy.com and Initiation, My Journey with an Apache Menace Man, and all of that stuff. And that's how they can get a hold of me. I'm still casting 1 o'clock on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And I'm also on Brighteon and BitChute and iHeart and a lot of other folks that are echoing me out there.
Great. We appreciate that. And, I agree that your presentation is very measured and very calm and very rational, and we certainly appreciate all of that very much. And could you end us with about a 30-second prayer for the show?
Oh, that's great. Abum Deveshmaya, that's Father in Heaven in Aramaic. And also Wakantanka, a great mystery, that is in Lakota. Bichiakidan, that is in Inde in Apache. Please bless us and guide us and grace us with the great Holy Spirit and protect us and lead us not into temptation. Amen.
Thank you very much, Jeffrey. We really appreciate it. Everyone out there, have a wonderful week, and we will see you next time Inside the Matrix.
This is Inside the Matrix, hosted by Jimmy Brent.
Who are we talking about?
Jimmy Brent. Live every Sunday, 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern. Exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network.
It is worldwide.
Broadcasting from an undisclosed location deep within the neon capital of the world, Las Vegas, Nevada. For more information on the host and the show, please visit InsideTheMatrix.org. That's InsideTheMatrix.org. It's time to break the chains of manipulated consciousness and claim our true nature as creative divine beings. Inside the Matrix. Inside the Matrix.
This is KCOR Las Vegas, home of the Digital Radio Network, broadcasting from a shack just south of Area 51.
Wait, that doesn't exist.
This is the KCOR Digital Radio Network. Now for the news.